Hello, everyone, and welcome to another. Just kidding. I did say that I wasn't gonna do that to you guys, and that I was going to do my little tutorial videos pretty much coming from the heart, so that it sounds a little bit more genuine. I did take a few quick notes on what I want to bring up today, because I don't want to lose completely my train of thought. It has been known to happen. Seems to be happening more as you grow older. So just a little note for the younger ones among you. So today we are going to continue with the little tutorials that I want to put out for Franchise Hockey Manager 7/Hockey. Not everybody is super familiar with all of the verbiage of hockey and whatnot, or even the game modes that the game has to offer. So in my last video we talked about the different zones on the ice, what that means, what happens, if you try to, go into the offensive zone before the puck, that's an offside, right? We talked about that. Then I went over the different stats and stuff like that. So I really wanted to go through the basics of hockey so that so that you can grasp your head around some of that stuff. I mean, pretty much everybody knows what a goal is, but offsides, icing, what's that stuff? So that's in my first video. If you haven't watched it yet, I probably would recommend, if if you're not super familiar with that stuff, that you go and watch it. I try to go pretty much in depth about that. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit more about the different game modes that you can find in Franchise Hockey Manager 7. We're going to talk about roster composition and contracts and what that means. We're going to talk about some roster terminology like trading, waivers, free agents, what's all that stuff, right? So there's quite a bit to unpack there, and then I'll see how long the video is going. I might go over the different roles for the players in the game, but if the video is too long, I'm gonna keep that for next time. So today we're really gonna go into, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the game itself, Franchise Hockey Manager 7, because I use it as a platform to explain the stuff. So I really wanted to get into the core of the different modes that are in this game. So, the first top two we can probably skip. Continue game, load game. So technically, just an FYI, if you play more than one league and everything, continue game is going to load your latest played league. So if you're like me and you have more than one, because I do tutorials, I did a live session yesterday, then I have my tutorial save and I have my regular Franchise Hockey Manager 7 playthrough that I upload videos for. So when I want to get a different league loaded up, you go ahead and choose load game. But if you only have one league, or if you're playing the same one you just played, you click on continue game. Now what I wish continue game would show would be like in the baseball version, where they have the name of the league that you last loaded underneath, so that you're not confused. Alright, so then we're gonna go ahead and get into the actual game modes per se. So the first one we have here is the new standard game. So new standard game is basically you are starting in 2020/2021, depending on when you load your game. Out of the park development is pretty good about usually giving you options, especially for like this year. There's COVID, right? Hopefully that's not news to anybody, but there's COVID, so this schedule is way different than it usually is in the NHL. Even the divisions are completely different and everything. So usually Out of the Park is pretty good about giving you the option to just play as if COVID was not in our lives, and just have a regular season like you would see usually, or to play the actual schedule that's in the NHL right now. And also, depending on when you start your game, the rosters are going to be, more or less accurate. They also will update the rosters, as the season progresses and everything. So that's just your typical game. You start, today. So if if you don't know much about hockey, but you've heard the name Sidney Crosby or maybe Connor McDavid or something like that. They're going to be in that game mode, and that's probably a pretty good way to start playing. It comes with everything that's in the NHL right now. We're talking salary cap, roster limitations, how the waivers work and everything. And one thing that is very important to note before I go any further, most of what I'm going to say today is going to be in relation to the NHL and more of modern day. So think for most things like starting from the 1990s and up. And NHL, there's some different rules for rosters in European leagues where you can only have a certain amount of foreigners, and I'm not gonna go through all that. First of all, I don't know all of them, and this video would never end. So if you want to play in a German league or something like that, they're in the game, and you can select that from the new standard game. But some of the rules might not apply, like roster rules and everything. They might have a couple things that work differently. But if you start new standard game in the NHL, that's today. But you can totally start like in Sweden, Finland, all of those leagues that they have. And most of the players are gonna, most of the rosters are going to be accurate and everything, out of the park as volunteers that work on making the rosters as accurate as possible. So there's a community that works behind that to bring you the most accurate potentially rosters that you can get. So yeah, if you want to start a game, current day game, new standard game is your place to go. You can choose as many leagues as you want or toggle them off. Just keep in mind, if you have an older computer, the more leagues you have, the more that gets simmed in the background, so it might slow down your sims quite a bit. So just keep that in mind. Now the load quick start. So what a quick start is a predefined league setup that's not necessarily like the NHL. So for example, let's say that I create a fictional league, and I put teams and logos and a playoff format that you really like or something like that. Well, there's a way to make that into a quick start, and then basically every time, since it's a quick start, I wouldn't have to recreate that whole structure every single time that I want to start over. So if I create like that giant universe and everything that I really like and everything, but that I want to start as different teams or something like that, I don't have to recreate my universe from scratch every single time. I can save it as a quick start, and then I can load my quick start and have that custom-made league that I have created. So that's pretty much what a quick start is. Now the new historical game, which is what I tend to play the most personally. So Out of the Park Development as historical play starting from 1917. I want to say, and then you can take any team from any of those years and then start playing. It's gonna have all of the historical rookies and everything that are going to go into play, so that they come in the mostly in the right here. That I found a few mistakes, but it's usually minor, like a guy shows up 1 year later or something like that, but it really doesn't happen often. It's pretty accurate. So for example, you can, what I like to do, and I'm a Sens fan, as I have mentioned many times. I am unashamed of that. So what I like to do is to start in 1992 when the Sens entered the league and they were really, 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 really bad, and to try to make them into a contender as soon as possible. The quickest that I've brought them into the playoffs was 2 years later. That's the fastest I've done it. I didn't win the cup. I got swept in 4 by the Islanders, but I did it. So that's pretty much what historical game is. So maybe you have a fondness of, when there were less teams in the league and you want to play as, the Montreal Canadiens in the 60s or something like that, with all of those legends that were on those teams. You can do that through historical. The one thing that I will say about historical is that there's one option that you have to pay attention to. And it's that you basically have the option to have the rookies enter the league and join the teams as they were drafted, or you can ignore the drafts that happen in real life and do your own. So for example, with the Sens, the first year they were in the league, they drafted Alexander Daigle, right? So, and Daigle didn't pan out in real life, and he tends to not pan out in the game either. Wink wink tip. So if I were to redo the draft, I probably would go for Chris Pronger or another player other than Daigle with the first pick if I have the first one. That's because I'm afraid Daigle is not going to pan out in the game despite having some decent potential. I think I'm more comfortable with having Chris Pronger. That's revisionist history, right? If the Sens could redo that draft, I'm sure they would take Chris Pronger instead, but they went with Daigle. By redoing the draft, that's what it does. But if you select to have the rookies enter the league at age 17 to the team that drafted them, then I wouldn't get to do the draft, which means that, despite what happens, I would get Alexander Daigle after the first year in the league. So there's no way to change that after that. Another thing that is that might be fun to do with an historical game is do what is called, and you can do that in other modes too, I just haven't brought it up. To me, it's just that it makes maybe more sense in a historical game for some reason. And it is to do what's called a random debut. So you can basically start in 1992, for example, as the Sens, but have the entire player database be randomized into an initial draft. So maybe I get Bobby Orr, maybe I draft Bobby Orr to play on my 1992 Sens, and then my first line center might be Nathan McKinnon, and then maybe I get Jacques Plante in net, or so you get the gist. And then every year that you progress past that, random players from random eras are going to show up into the draft database. So then you can, next season you have the first draft pick, even if you have McKinnon, Bobby Orr, and Jacques Plante on your team, you finished last. Maybe Wayne Gretzky shows up, and you get to try to draft him first overall. So that can be fun for kind of hey, what happened if that player played in that era or whatnot. It's pretty fun. I toyed with that for a little bit, and I had Patrice Bergeron playing in 1917. The concept of a pretty good two-way forward back then was kind of foreign, so it was kind of interesting to see what would happen there. A new exhibition game, I'm not going to go too much in detail about that, mostly because you basically just pick teams to play against each other and see what is going to happen. There's no statistical value for anything other than that particular game played, so it doesn't save anywhere. So you don't have a quick league or anything like that where it's where you're gonna have, that player has scored 15 times in 15 games that I've simulated between the two, or anything like that. So it's fun to see what ifs, but compared to playing a full franchise, personally I don't really see the value in that, other than maybe one thing that it could be used for maybe is if you like to bet on games, I guess, in real life, and Boston and Washington, who's going to win tonight, you put it in there and sim the game, and Washington wins 4-2, I'm gonna go with that, maybe. I don't know. I don't toy with the exhibition game much. I really like the aspect of being a GM and making deals and everything, so it doesn't make much sense to me, but some people might like to do that. And then we have the last two. So new custom game is basically where you want to go if you want to do a fictional league, because you can create fictional league that are going to have fictional teams with fictional players in a fictional year and with rules of your choosing. And they have really revamped that this year. There's more options than there used to be, and a lot of people really like to play with fictional leagues, fictional players and everything, and there's definitely advantages for that. Some people like to toy with that, like for hours, making uniforms and everything, and making sure that all of the divisions make sense, for the cities and everything. Personally, what I like it for the most is that I don't go in with knowledge that the computer doesn't have. Since the players are all fictional, I can't go and be like, oh well, I'm gonna draft Jaromir Jagr because I'm pretty sure he's gonna become really good like he did in real life, unless I get dicked over by the RNG, which probably usually never happens for a guy like Jagr. But anyway, so with a fictional league, you don't have that. You have that guy named, Nick Wells, and you don't know who he is. Your scout says that he's a 3.5 star potential player, but is he really? You're a little bit more at the mercy of that. And for that reason, that's kind of why I typically don't recommend for brand new players to go with a fictional league. First of all, the league creation and all of the league levels that you have and everything, that might sound a little bit daunting for a brand new player that doesn't know too much either about the game or even hockey in general. So I probably don't recommend that for new players for that reason. I mean, if you want to, there's a way that you can start super small to get the hang of it and everything, but then again, you don't have the option to rely on knowledge that you have in real life. Like if you start a new standard game right now, that Connor McDavid is going to be a really good player. In a brand new league, there's not really a way to tell unless that you go into commissioner mode and that you turn that on and that you look at all of the true ratings and everything. But that, to me, doing that kinds of defeat the purpose of playing the game. So there's really a lot of things that you can do, and like I said, they have added a lot of different things to fictional leagues. It's a little bit more robust than it's been in the previous years. So definitely, again, if you're brand new, maybe don't look at it right away. Maybe try a new standard game to get familiarized with all of the jargon of hockey and the game interface and everything, all of that stuff. Maybe it makes more sense to do that. And then finally, we have the historical challenge, and that one I'm gonna click on. So we have the historical challenges here. So if you're following my Franchise Hockey Manager 7 series on YouTube, that's what I'm doing right now. So I picked the Tampa Bay Lightning. Down here because I like that challenge. That that was a challenge that was just not one season where I would be done with it. Within a few videos, I wanted something that would last me a little bit. So the challenge for Tampa Bay Lightning is Tampa Bay was the first of the 1990s expansion teams to win the Stanley Cup, doing so in their 12th season in the league. To beat the challenge, start with the real expansion Lightning in 1992-1993, but this time managed to win the Stanley Cup within your first decade in the league, no later than 2001 and 2002. So that's what I'm doing right now in my video. There's all kinds of different challenges. If you've seen the video on my YouTube channel, I have imported my live session that I did yesterday. So I started a historical challenge for the Nordiques, which is a one-season challenge. And I had to stop before the end because I couldn't talk in the end. That was over 4 hours of me talking almost non-stop. So by the end, I was a little hoarse there. But that's what I'm doing right now. Pretty much every team is in there, even teams from the past that don't exist anymore, like the Montreal Wanderers. You can can go ahead and take that team and do that challenge. Or, maybe you're a Buffalo Sabre fan, so you get a challenge for that. So pretty much all of the teams are represented here. It's not just the current NHL teams. There's quite a bit there. So when you do that, as far as I can tell, you cannot get fired. You cannot click the be fired box. It doesn't make much sense if you have a 10-year challenge, but they fire you after the first season, right? So I don't think you can get a can for that. And you can't really change the settings where you would get the rookies as Tampa Bay got them, for example, for me, as Tampa Bay got them. So you get to do the draft, and that means that you get to trade draft picks to make your team better and stuff like that. So in the game, I did my first draft already in my series, and I'm about to do the second one. And, of course, I go in with knowledge of players and how they are probably going to turn out, but then again, I have a 10-year challenge to win the cup, so I have to use every bit of knowledge that I have to make it happen, because after all this, as they say, the Stanley Cup is the hardest sports trophy to win. So yeah, the playoff hockey, if you haven't really watched hockey in your life, playoffs hockey is pretty intense and pretty awesome to watch, especially when you have two big rivals facing each other, like Montreal and Boston facing each other in the playoffs, or stuff like that. Yeah, that's totally worth watching. So that's pretty much it for the modes here. I didn't go in full detail for each mode, but I think I gave a pretty good overview of what you can do with the game. For new players of the game, I would usually probably recommend playing either a new standard game or maybe a new historical game. Maybe you've watched a little bit of hockey in your youth, like, in the 90s and 80s, like me, and maybe you recognize some names and you want to start, like, in 1988 or something. I don't know. So that makes sense. Or maybe start a new standard game, and then when you get more familiar, you can totally go and create your own universe and challenge yourself by not knowing, who those players are. So that's pretty much that for the game mode. So now we're going to look a little bit more at roster composition and what contracts are in the NHL. So I'm going to load my tutorials game here. I'm going to mute that for a second, and I'm going to cough and drink some water. Okay, and and again, keep in mind, I'm mostly going to show you what roster is in modern day. If you go back, if you're trying to play in 1917, there's a lot of things that are going to be different. I'm not gonna cover that though, because it's a little bit daunting. I explained that in my first tutorial video. The NHL has a very complicated and scattered history. It's not like a line that flows, a straight line or anything like that. So anyway, alright, so this is your game interface, by the way. This is the first thing you're going to see whenever you launch a game. Some things are going to be a little bit different, but that you might not be seeing that right away here, depending on when you start and everything. But for the most part, this is what you're going to see here. I'm not going to go into every single option right now. Excuse me. I will eventually, but for today I want to make sure that you guys understand, the complexity of a hockey roster and everything. So I went from the rules, the rules of hockey, so what I consider the basics. Now I'm moving up, one step, talking about the different game modes, and that's fine. And then we're going to talk about rosters and what comprise of a roster and everything, and then I'm going to go a little bit more in depth with the UI and everything further down the road. So I'm trying to make a natural progression that makes sense to me, starting at the bottom and working our way up. Hopefully it makes sense to you too. And again, I'm open for suggestions or comments or anything like that. If there's something you would like for me to bring up, I'm going to be more than happy to look at that and see if it's possible. Right, so this is your typical screen. So currently I'm in the preseason. So the preseason in Franchise Hockey Manager 7 is always 7 games, regardless of when you play or anything like that. You always get 7 preseason games that you get to play. Here we have our, standings and everything. Again, we're not gonna necessarily look at that just yet. That's something that's gonna be for another video. So we are the Ottawa Senators, of course. So I'm gonna come here, and this is our roster screen here. So there's quite a few things that we need to take into consideration on that screen. So one of them is that right now we're in preseason. So when you're in preseason, you do not have a roster limit for how many players you can have on your roster. Currently I have 27. That is more than the maximum allowed in the regular season. The reason for that is that during preseason, teams in real life as well will often carry 40 and even 50 players during training camp, and they get to try different combinations. They bring their young players and everything. If you're more familiar with baseball, it's basically the equivalent of training camp or spring training that they have, like in it starts in February now. It used to start in March when I was a kid. But you get the point. It's a training. The preseason in hockey is where your veterans kind of get in gear. You play them a little bit. There's a rule. I don't know if the rule is in the game actually. There's a rule in the NHL that whenever you play a preseason game, you need to play at least I think it's 9 players per preseason game that have NHL experience or something like that. So you cannot just send just rookies that have never played or anything like that. You need to have at least 9 veterans in the lineup. I don't know if that is in the game. I cannot say for sure that it is or not, but it is a rule in the NHL. So what we have here is we have 27 players. Now again, that's more than the limit roster during regular season. So the roster limit is 23 players. So you can carry 23 players on your NHL squad at any time during the regular season. But you only dress 20 for a game. That means at any given time you have 3 players that are not going to be dressed to play the game. They cannot get dressed if you get an injury. They cannot get dressed and come and play to finish the game for the injured player or anything like that. If you get an injury during a game, you have to finish the game without your injured player and, figure it out. So, excuse me again, my throat is really bad today. So for a regular season hockey game, typically you're gonna have dressed for a total of 20 players. Typically you're gonna have 2 goaltenders dressed, 6 defensemen, and 12 forwards. I would say 98% of the time that's how teams go with. So you have 4 forward lines with 3 players. So you have your 2 wingers and you have the center in the middle. So that's 3 times 4 lines. That's 12 players. And then you have 6 defensemen. You have 2 defensemen, your left D and your right D. So 6. You have 2 players times 3 different pairings, so that's 6 defensemen, and then you have your starting goaltender and then the backup. So that's usually how it is. Some teams sometimes are going to want to still have the 2 goaltenders, but have 7 defensemen and 11 forwards instead. That's to give them a little bit more flexibility with their defensemen, and then on forward they kind of rotate, a player to play with the. You're gonna have two players that don't, that are not on a full line, so they usually rotate a player there. In the game, it kind of doesn't work perfectly. You can kind of do it, but it doesn't work perfectly in Franchise Hockey Manager 7. Typically in real life, a coach that does that is going to oftentimes carry a defenseman that they want the extra defenseman. They're going to be kind of sheltering him. Maybe he's like a guy that's really good on the power play or something like that, so they want to have him around for when they have a power play to go and shoot the puck real hard or whatever. But then, when it's 5-on-5 play, they don't play him all that much. And that gives you also kind of flexibility in case you get an injury on defense, right? So I said if you get an injury, you cannot get a guy that's scratched, that's not dressed. You cannot bring him back, and dress him and finish the game for them. So typically, though, you're going to see 2 goaltenders, 6 defensemen, and 12 forwards. Now, the extra players, so that's 20 players, and you can have up to 23. The extra 2 players, that's really up to the teams. Very, 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 very rarely a team is going to carry 3 goaltenders total. So they're going to have 2 dressed for a game and then 1 that's scratched. But it's pretty rare. It does happen. Actually, I think the Toronto Maple Leafs right now, as we speak on January 14th, I do believe that they carry 3 goaltenders right now because they don't want to lose Arundel on waivers. Now, waivers is something we're going to talk about a little bit later. So train of thought. So yeah, teams will very rarely do that, but it does happen. Typically, you're either going to carry 2 extra defensemen and 1 forward, or 1 extra defenseman and 2 extra forwards. I would say it's probably it makes usually more sense to carry 1 extra defenseman and 2 extra forwards, but depending on what you have on your team, you can, kind of play around with that. The idea is that, when you have a guy that's injured for not too long, you can swap them out, or if you have a guy that's not playing very well lately, you can kind of move them around and maybe dress another player and try to shake things around a little bit. So there's different things you can do with your lineup with that. So having 23 players on your roster allows you to have some flexibility in case of injury, or somebody catches the flu or something. You're able to undress them and then get somebody to play for them for the next game. So you don't have to carry 23 players. Sometimes for cap reasons, teams are going to carry like 21 or 22 players just because they're so cut tightly to the cap that they cannot afford to have like another salary in the NHL. So sometimes that happens for that reason. So hopefully that makes sense. So what we have here is basically we have our goaltender. So you have the positions there. So G stands for goaltender, right? LD stands for left defense. RD stands for right defense. LW stands for left wing. C for center, and RW for right wing. So players will play at their favorite positions, or you should play them in the positions that they're the most comfortable with. So when you click on a player, you're gonna see right here. First of all, you're gonna see which position they are good at. So Shabbat is a 20 for left defense, and he's a 15 for right defense. So he's still pretty decent if you play him on the right, but technically you should try to play him on the left as much as you can. You probably shouldn't put him up front. Actually, I would never recommend. There's only a very, very, very few exceptions of players that you can put on defense or forward, and they're gonna do pretty good. one exception like that is Brent Burns playing for the San Jose Sharks right now. He started his career as a forward, then he went and played some D, then some more forward, and now he's back playing D. Another player like that was Dustin Buffalon, but he's not playing right now. But in his time with Chicago, he would play forward and put himself in front of the net because he's a big guy. But then he went to Winnipeg, and over there he played defense pretty much only. So usually you don't want to put a forward on defense or anything like that, so you have to keep that in mind. When you have a player that's injured, you want to recall a player that can fit that position, even if he's maybe not as good, so for example, okay, right here I have Mike Riley that's hurt, right? So he has that little thing there that shows that he's injured. So if you right click on Riley here, I can put him to the injury list, and that that's fine. So let's say I want to put him on the injured list. By the way, if you put a player on the injured reserve, he needs to stay there for at least 10 days. Even if he gets LT prior to that, he needs to stay there for 10 days. So let's say, I send him down, and then, I'm looking, and then I'm seeing, Connor Brown in the minors, and I'm like, oh man, he's a 2.5-star player. That's a lot better than, Zaitsev here. That's 2 stars. So I'm gonna get Connor Brown up. Well, Connor Brown is not a defenseman, so it's not going to help you very much. You really should be getting Zaitsev instead, because even if Connor Brown is a 2.5-star player, I can guarantee you he's not going to play as a 2.5-star player playing defense. So you want to have him playing, at their position. However, having a left D playing right D or a right D playing left D, it's pretty acceptable. You might lose a little bit on talent, but not so much that it's gonna really, really, really hurt your team. So if you're in a crunch and you want to play Thomas Chabot on the right instead of the left, and you can see in the little mouse over there on the screen that it says LD/RD. So he's able to play both. He's better at left D, but he won't hurt you too much playing right D. So that's not too bad. It's kind of the same thing for forwards. Although I would say that typically you can probably switch both wings. So a left wing can probably play right wing pretty good, and vice versa. A winger playing center, not always. Some of them maybe, not always. Playing center implicates a little bit more things, especially defensively. They're the ones usually taking the face off, and they're usually in most systems also the first forward back to play defense and everything. So not every winger is able to play the wing. However, most centers you can slot anywhere at forward. Usually they're not going to get lost playing the wing because they have even less responsibility, if you would. So usually that's not too much of a problem. Of course, there's exceptions for everything, but generally speaking, that's a pretty good rule of thought. So this is your roster composition, right? So don't have really a limit of how many players you can bring to training camp or preseason. So you can bring 40 if you want. You want to have a look at a lot of different players, see how they play. Just remember, you only have 7 games in this particular game. In Franchise Hockey Manager 7, you only get 7 preseason games. So the more players you bring, the less likely you are to be able to tell who's playing good or not because of small sample sizes. Because a guy scores 3 goals in one game doesn't mean that he's going to be a superb goal scorer. I mean, Lyle Odeline scored a hat-trick in his career, and he wasn't a very good goal scorer. He was kind of a very rough defensive defenseman, but hey, he got a hat-trick in his life, so yeah, nobody can take that away from him. But you wouldn't want to necessarily put him on your power play because of that. Right, and on that screen, you see all kinds of information like the nationality of the players. Usually that's not all that important. You see how their happiness, so that can vary. Like if if you put a player that feels like he should be playing in the NHL and you put him in the minors, that might make him unhappy, or if he doesn't play enough or things like that. Typical video game stuff, really. Age of the player, and then fitness, that's how healthy they are. The more you play a player in many games in succession, and depending on your strategies and the tactics for your players and their role, that's going to go down faster or slower depending on the case. Also, whenever you have an injury, whenever you get a player back from injury, he's always at 80%. The number, that's pretty easy. Now, cap it, I talked about salary cap. So if you play Modern Era starting from the lockout in 2005 up to today, there's going to be a salary cap. So that means that you cannot go over that particular number in total salary for the season. So it's kind of an added challenge. I mean, in real life for the GMs for sure, but in the game here as well, you have to make all of your numbers line up properly, so that you don't go over the cap. There's also a floor, so you can't just put rookies that are paid $900,000 a year and just wait for them to get really good and everything like that. You have to, there's a floor that you have to reach. So typically, if the cap goes up $2 million, usually the floor is gonna follow. There can be some differences with that though, but typically that's kind of how it works. So you always have to keep that in mind. Length of contract, pretty straightforward. So anything that says 1 year here, that means that it's the last year of contract, and that's also when you can start negotiating for a contract extension for your players. So right now I would be able to sign a contract extension for Anders Nilsson if I wanted to. Now Nilsson is not with the Sens anymore in real life, but for the purposes here, he is, and he's on an expiring contract. So if I want to bring Anders Nilsson back, I can go here and click on renew contract, and then I can negotiate with him for an extension. But I can't do that for Matt Murray because he has 4 years left on his contract. So the option to extend the contract is not there. All right, and then it says who the contract is for. For NHL teams, it's pretty much always going to tell you the team that you're playing for. But in the minors, sometimes players can go on loan, so the contract is going to show a different team than the player is on because of that. Waivers tells you if the player has to clear waivers before being sent down. I'm gonna go back on waivers a little bit later, but right now they all say no because we're in the preseason. So in preseason you can move players up and down, but starting at a certain date before the start of the regular season, and you get a message, you get an email in the game that's going to tell you, hey, those players by that date have to clear waivers to be sent down, and then they give you the list of those players. But during the course of the regular season, it's going to tell you here, yes, no, yes, no. So a player that says no, you can send down, without any fear of losing him to waivers. But a player that says yes needs to clear waivers before he can be sent to the minors. And we talked about the game ratings in the last video. I'm not going to get over that again. And then we have the different star ratings. Star ratings is kind of a little bit of a overall overview of a player, but it's not everything. So you really should be looking at the actual ratings of a player, and that's the ratings themselves are gonna be for a different video. But if you go here, you're gonna see all kinds of different ratings. So you have the offensive ratings, defensive ratings. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. I'm not gonna go too much in detail there. Then you have the mental ratings and the physical ratings. So of course, you want your players to be the best at everything that they can. But players are human, so they have strengths and weaknesses, and it's up to you to figure out what you want to do with some of those players. So for example, Eric Brandstrom is really good at puck handling. He's really good, but Obviously, he's a defenseman. He's not going to be very good at face-offs, right? So, and he's not a very good fighter. So that tells me that he's more of a puck mover than, a really tough guy to play against or anything like that. And then you have the different roles here. Again, I'm not going to go through all of that, but I would definitely suggest that you don't just go by the star ratings and that you come and check over here at the different ratings, because a guy might be a 2-star player, but what you really need is a guy that can shoot the puck, and maybe that guy is really good at shooting the puck but not really at much else, so maybe he can help your team still even if he's a 2-star player. So those are the kind of things you want to look at. Alright, so we went through the game modes. I explained the roster composition. Now there's one more thing that we need to talk about that, and we are going to see it here, and it is contracts. Again, that's an NHL thing, right? I am not going to be talking about, how the contracts work, in the KHL or anything like that. This is mostly about the NHL. So what you need to look at here, so we have all of the players that are contracted with the team. Some of them are, of course, NHL players, but there's also players that are still in the minors or even in the juniors. So what you want to look at is the number of players right down here, completely at the bottom left. It says 45 out of 50. That's because you cannot just sign absolutely everybody that you want to sign. You have a limit of 50 pro contracts that you can have players for. So you cannot have more than 50 total players. So that includes your players that are currently on your NHL team. That also includes your players that you have signed contracts for, but that you're playing in the minors. They count as well. So that's what it is all about. And you can see the type of contract that they have here. So you see a lot of standard NHL contracts, and then some of them are on their entry-level contracts. So the entry-level contract is the first contract that a rookie signs. Whenever after you draft them, you're like, oh, I like this guy, he's going to be good and everything, and you offer them their first contract. That's called the entry-level contract. In the game, I'm not sure that it works exactly like it does in real life. In real life, the length and the salary is regulated depending on the age of the player and where they're playing and that kind of stuff. So entry-level contract is always going to be 2 or 3 years. It's never more than 3 years. And then the salary is also dependent on a bunch of factors. But in the game, I think you can kind of tweak that. I don't think you can give them more than 3 years. So, but for the salary, I think you can kind of tweak that. It's not like generated by rules of the league or anything like that. The reason for that is going to be explained a little bit later. But yeah, that's pretty much the contracts. And now okay, and now with the contracts, I do want to explain there's 2 types of pro contracts that you can give to your players. We're going to tackle down the entry-level contract right now. Entry-level contract is always a 2-way contract. So a 2-way contract, what that means is that the player is going to have a figure that he's making if he plays in the NHL, and then he's going to have a much lesser salary that he's making if you play them in the minors. So for example, a player might be paid 100,000, well, not 100,000, but a player, yeah, just for explanation's sakes, because I don't have a real example in front of me. So a player might be paid, for example, $300,000 in the NHL, but only $75,000 if he plays in the AHL, which is the farm team of your NHL team. So players on 2-way contracts, that's usually what it means. A lot of times, but not always, a lot of times a player that is on a 2-way contract can also go down without having to go through waivers, but that's not always true. It used to be way back, a 2-way contract meant that you could just pass them through waivers whenever you wanted, but with the last, I think it's the last players convention, they changed that, and it's really more of a measure of salary. So an NHL player usually wants to get a one-way contract as soon as possible because that is guaranteed money. That is a guaranteed amount of money that they make, because on a player on a one-way contract, first of all, a player on a one-way contract always has to clear waivers. There's no exceptions that I know of for that. And they are guaranteed money. So a one-way contract for $3 million, and your team wants to send you in the AHL. Well, first of all, you have to clear waivers, and if you do, you're still being paid $3 million even though you play in the minors. You're probably not really happy, because if you're making $3 million, you probably should be playing in the NHL, and that's probably how you feel about yourself. But money-wise, you're still making the same amount of money. The team is still going to be paying you the same amount of dollars. So that's why you very rarely see guys, and that's why nowadays you don't really see guys in the minors that are making like $8 million, and that's what people... That's something that changed in a convention several years ago. It was what was called the Wade Redden clause, basically. Wade Redden used to be an Ottawa Senator defenseman, and then he signed for the big bucks with the New York Rangers, but his play really declined. So the Rangers, to avoid having to pay that huge salary and be cut at the cap, they sent Wade Redden down so that his contract would be buried in the minors. You can't really do that anymore. Now you're going to pay them top dollars regardless. So that's really all you have to know about the contracts. You cannot have more than 50. A two-way contract means that the player is making a different salary at the NHL level compared to the AHL level. And a one-way contract, you always have to go through waivers, and usually those are the bigger contracts. Those are like the 8 years at $8 million type of contracts that you're gonna see. So that means guaranteed money at the NHL level for the player. So those are the different type of contracts. There's a few different nuances to that, but for the sake of the game and to not make it too complex, we're just going to stop there with the contracts. So now we're going to talk about roster terminology, and that's going to be my last topic because I've been talking for a while. Again, I tend to talk a lot, so I'm going to mute that again, cough again, drink some water, and I'll be right here, right back. Alright, so the first roster terminology that I want to talk about is waivers. So you've heard me say the word waivers a few times. I've been throwing it in your face for a little bit here, and I didn't quite explain what it is. So basically, waiver is... If you're familiar with baseball, it's pretty much the same thing as trying to send down a player that's out of options, like to AAA or AA. That's kind of the same process here. It's basically the NHL team trying to send a player to to the minors, either because they have somebody coming back from injury, they need to make room on the roster, or maybe the player is not playing all that great and they want to maybe see if he can get his groove back in the minors or something like that. So waivers is like the status that you put a player in, where they stay on the waivers for 24 hours, and then teams have the option to claim the player if they want. Usually starting from the team that's that has the worst record in the league and then going up. But then if the team that's dead last already claimed a player, then they go back up, and then it's the second team with the worst record that has the first say and things like that. Typically players that are paid a lot of money that are put on waivers are not claimed, mostly because they make a lot of money, and if they're being sent down, there's a reason, right? And teams tend to spend really close to the cap. So most teams, if you send down a $3 million a guy down, most teams won't even have the room on their salary cap to, claim the guy and play him. So most teams are not going to do it, but there's always a few teams that have room, and that, the danger to lose a player is there. Now, this season in real life, we've seen maybe a little bit more waivers than usual because of the taxi squad and everything. So the Sens lost Rudolph Balcers, so he was claimed back by San Jose. So now Rudolph Balcers didn't clear waivers, so the Sens tried to send him to the minors, but he had to clear waivers because of his age, and then he was claimed by San Jose, and now he's going to be playing in San Jose. So there's a few rules with waivers. The first one is that, well, first of all, I already mentioned that a player that's on a one-way contract is going to have to go through waivers. The rest of the stuff has to do with not seniority, but how many games they've played in the NHL and throughout how many seasons. If you want to have the exact numbers, I would recommend that you probably look it up. There's if you just Google like NHL waivers rules, there's a pretty easy to understand Wikipedia article about that probably can explain it a little bit better than I can, but just know that a player on a two-way contract is not necessarily exempt from waivers if they have accrued a lot of playing time in the NHL and things like that, and their age as well comes into play. So I recommend that you go and read that if you want to know a little bit more what comes into play as far as waivers go. Now, if you go on hockey forums and boards and everything, you're gonna see a lot of people talk about re-entry waivers. Those are people, I see that a lot. I go on hockey forums and everything, and people are still talking about re-entry waivers. Those have not existed since 2013. Was it 13, the last lockout? The last convention changed that. So basically, some players had to clear waivers when you were calling them up as well. So not only when you were sending them down, but then you wanted to call them back up, and they needed to clear waivers there. But that does not exist anymore. So if you see somebody on a forum somewhere, or you're having a discussion with somebody about hockey, and they're talking about, oh, I wish my team would recall that guy, but he has to go through re-entry waivers, you can tell them, hey, that hasn't existed since 2013. There's no re-entry waivers anymore. So I just wanted to clear that up because there's a little bit of misinformation about that. So I wanted to make sure that you understood that. So there is no re-entry waivers in 2021 in hockey, despite what a lot of people will try to make you believe. So that's pretty much it for waivers. If there's something that's not clear, feel free to ask me in the comments. I will be more than happy to try to answer you about that. Then we have trades. Now, trades is pretty simple. Of course, you have that player that I want, and I'm offering you this player that I don't necessarily want anymore, or that I can do without. Are you interested in that player? Yes or no? Let's trade players. That's pretty much the same in every single sports, right? The one thing that's maybe different in hockey, now, especially if you're like a baseball fan, there's not that in baseball, but in hockey, you can trade draft picks. So, sometimes you're going to try to sweeten the deal. Like, okay, well, I want this player from you, and I'm offering you this player. Okay, you're telling me this player is not enough. How about I add a draft pick to that? Oh, now that's enough. Okay, cool, let's do this. So it's often used as a sweetener. Of course, the higher the pick, the more value they have. There's kind of not really a running joke, but there's kind of a thing going on in the NHL that's been going on for a very long time, and it is to kind of, the second round draft picks in the NHL are, traded around like candy. the percentage of a second round draft pick player to make the NHL and be a mainstay for at least a few years, the percentage is not that high, but you often find quite a few steals in the second round, so it's kind of seen like as a really good gamble. So you're gonna see left and right people trading a player for a second round draft pick, or getting this player for this player in a second round draft pick. You see that a lot. GMs just love to trade second round draft picks for some reason. So, but you never know. I mean, one of the best players to ever play for the Ottawa Senators was Daniel Alfredson, and he was a 6th round draft pick, so you never know. Yeah, you just like in baseball, sometimes you have guys drafted in the 50th round that turn out to be really good players. Sometimes you just don't know. But I did want to bring that up, that trades in hockey, you can trade draft picks. Sometimes you can use that to sweeten the deal for sure. Now keep in mind, if you play in historical and that you click that option that I talked about where you do not draft, but that the rookies join the team as they join them in real life, you won't have draft picks to trade. That makes trading a lot harder. I can attest to that. That's how I set up my Franchise Hockey Manager 6 playthrough that I did 170 videos for, and without draft picks to sweeten the deal, sometimes it was really hard to make trades. So just wanted to bring that up. And then there's the trade deadline. So all the major sports have a trade deadline of some sorts. So hockey is no different for that. So the trade deadline, however, is not like in baseball. In baseball, the trade deadline is July 31st every year, except, COVID related. But in hockey, it's not always the same date. It's usually at the end of February or sometime at the start of March nowadays. It used to be later than that, like near the end of March. They kind of moved it around a little bit. But nowadays, in 2021, the trade deadline is around the end of February. The game is going to tell you, like if you go here, so in the events here, whenever you're getting close to the trade deadline, it's going to tell you here, or you can always come to the NHL drop down here and go to events, and then it's going to tell you trading deadline. So February 24th for that particular game that I have loaded up here. So I would have all the way to February 24th to make trades. Now in the NHL, you can trade after the trade deadline. You absolutely can, but there's very few reasons to do so. And the reason is that if you trade for a player after the trade deadline, the player that you acquire is not he's not eligible to play in the playoffs. So the last one that I can remember on top of my head that was traded after the trade deadline was when the Boston Bruins traded for Marty Turco, the goaltender. I guess they had some injury. It was a few years back, so I don't remember 100%. Boston must have had some injuries or something in net, and they made a trade after the trade deadline to get Marty Turco, but Turco was not available to play in the playoffs if the Bruins made it to the playoffs. It's extremely rare that you're going to see a trade after the trade deadline in the NHL, but it can happen. It's just very rare, and that's the reason why, because even if you get Wayne Gretzky after the trade deadline, well, guess what, he's not playing in the playoffs for you, so you're kind of adding an extra salary for nothing. Right, and then I also want to talk about trading rights. So when you go to make a trade, you can trade your established players, you can trade your draft picks, and you can also trade some of your rookies that you have drafted but that you have not offered a contract to yet. So let's see if I can show you what I mean. So I'm going to come with the Red Wings here. I'm not going to make a trade or anything, but I'm going to come to the Senators, right? So whenever you try to make a trade, you have that window here where your scout is telling you, oh, I think that the Red Wings are bad at goalie, both defense and center. So that kind of gives you an idea of what they might be wanting to pick up. And here, I can go to my Senators players. So I'm going to have all of the players that I have under contract, all of my, minor league players and whatnot. And then I have my entry draft pick, so I'm like, okay, so I have San Jose's second round draft pick that I can play with. I have the Columbus Blue Jackets second round draft pick that I can play with. But you also have the Senators, right? So those are players that were drafted by the Sens, but that don't have a contract yet. So, for example, maybe I want to try to trade Jake Sanderson. So right now, Jake Sanderson is playing in the NCAA, so he cannot sign a contract right now, right? So unless he leaves college. So maybe I want to trade his rights to the Red Wings. Maybe I want to try to get Dylan Larkin or something. So I'm going to try to trade my rights to a guy that has a 5-star potential and see if they want to make the trade. So you can also trade the rights. I'm not sure if you can do that in all of the sports. I'm pretty sure you can do it in baseball, and I'm not familiar enough with basketball and football to be able to say either way. But yeah, I wanted to show you that you can trade players that you drafted that might have a good potential, but you haven't put them under contract just yet, and you want to try and trade their rights away. You can try to do that as well. All right, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover for today. So in the next video, in the next tutorial, I'm going to go through the different roles on a lineup, and I'm going to talk about lineup diversity, right? You don't want to have 18 players that all play exactly the same way, unless, the way they play is perfection. You don't want to have, 18 players that are exactly the same. You need, to have kind of a guys that can do different things. So we're going to talk about that as well. We're going to look over the roles and the ratings, and then eventually we're going to go through the UI for the game itself, for Franchise Hockey Manager 7. We're going to go through that so that I can explain what the buttons do in the most important places, because there's a lot of information in there that you can find. So we're going to do that at another point. I'm going to go ahead and stop here for today, so hopefully you found the video to be helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Any comments, let me know. Anything you would like for me to talk about in the future, let me know. I'm here to try to teach you a little bit more about hockey and the Franchise Hockey Manager 7 game, and hopefully I'm clearing up some stuff for you. So we are stopping here. As usual, I want to thank you for tuning in, and if you've liked this video, please feel free to like, subscribe, share, comment, all of that good stuff. And until I roll this game again, I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.